So a bit of a one-slide recap. Last month we talked about something we call nemawashi, which is about how we prepare the ground for improvement, how we prepare the soil and nourish the soil for improvement. And what we often find is that we're often working with barren soil and trying to plant our improvement work in ground that hasn't been prepared. We talked about improvement work is challenging and that 70% of improvement efforts fail. And then we know that through research now that well-sustained research is that only 5% of change efforts actually lead to a sustainable improvement. And while we're adding this much research and this much resource to the effort, that we think, is it about time that we stop riding this particular dead horse? So we covered off a number of things around how we can do this better, how we can focus on how we prepare the soil, which will ultimately result in more successful outcomes and much more productive change efforts. So this session really is about how we take this to the next level, how we take it to the next stage, and how we start to create our improvement journey, and how sometimes we, whilst the destination is important, we don't always think about the journey on how we're going to get there. So over the course of the next 20 minutes or so, I want to share with you my thoughts around how we can improve that. So a few weeks ago, I think about a few months ago now, actually, I was talking to some colleagues of mine, colleagues of mine at Warwick Business School, Professor Bernard Crump and Dr. Nicola Burgess. And we're talking about improved methodology within the NHS. And I was kind of sharing with them about some of my thoughts around how I saw improvement as a methodology across a lot of the health service, what I see going around the country. And in that conversation, they were helping me frame that in a way which I could describe. And we come to it, and we come to the conclusion around how we can describe it as the anatomy and physiology of improvement. And what I mean by that is that the anatomy is the framework and the structures that we often focus on the anatomy of improvement, which is all around the action plans, the governance that sits behind it, what training do we need to give people to be able to deliver this improvement. We don't often think about the physiology, the functions within those structures, that actually result in the improvement. So don't think about the relationships, the mindsets, the people, the cultures, the interdependencies. This is what I want to focus on today. Is a bit more about, whereas the anatomy is often focused on the anatomy of improvement, focused on the destination, the outputs, the results of the improvement work. The physiology is focused more about how we're going to get there. As I was preparing for this session, I was thinking about one phrase came to mind constantly, and it's from a guy that I've read before. It's from a guy called Stephen Covey, and he talks about begin with the end in mind. And I absolutely believe this all the time. We should always begin work with the end in mind. We should know where we're heading to. You know, and far from me to disagree with somebody like Stephen Covey. Written a great book, highly recommend it, one called The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Stephen, but this principle of start with the end in mind is absolutely right, and I wouldn't disagree. But I also want to add to that about how we also think about how we're going to get to the end, and that's really the focus of today. Because our expectations are often that we think this is a linear journey. We think there's a start point and the end point. We start and we pull the people together, we probably draw an action plan, we've assigned tasks, and we believe there's a certain end point. But the reality is often very different. The reality to get to the end point, to get to the destination, is often filled with pitfalls and rework and redirection and changes and reflection and various improvements, and also many successes in there as well. And we have to consider those as part of the journey rather than just considering what the destination looks like. So I want to share something about me, about something that's really important to me. Every year, our family holiday to me is probably the most important thing that happens. Really great time. Me, Joe, the kids go out for 2 weeks in the sun, nice warm weather, swim in the sea, in the pool, nice drinks, nice food, just time spent together, which we don't get very often. So often the planning of that holidays often comes to me. So I'll start browsing through various websites, trying to find what that ideal holiday will look like. So I have a really clear idea of what the end looks like. I begin with the end in mind. I know what the destination looks like. It looks a little bit like this. So I know that this is what I'm aiming for. It also looks a little bit like this, and also like this. But I also know if I want to get there, There are a number of steps I have to take in the journey to enable us to get to that destination. So I know that I'm going to have to travel. There's traffic. Need to go on the motorway to the airport. Need to find our way there. Need to know the journey. Need to know if there's any roadwork or any diversions we need to consider. When we get to the airport, need to know where to park. Where's the parking? Have we booked it in advance? Check in. Are our bags packed correctly? Have we got the right paperwork? Got our tickets? Got our passports? Through security. On the airplane, video, books, music, snacks, whatever we need to take for that part of the journey. Get to the other side, find our transport, get to our accommodation, unpack, find the Wi-Fi, which is obviously the most important bit. Cup of tea, beer, bit of a snack, whatever, and then finally we get to the point where we've reached our destination. But we wouldn't get to that point, I wouldn't get to that ideal picture that I had in my mind without considering first all the steps in the journey to get there. So a slide that I shared last month, again from Stephen Covey, and reflecting the same thing. If your ladder's not leaning against the right wall, every step we take just gets us to the wrong place faster. So got on the wrong motorway, gone to the wrong airport, got on the wrong plane, got on the wrong transport. It's just going to get us to the wrong place faster. So as you think about your improvement journey, really clear about you begin with the end in mind. You know where you're heading, but be really clear about how you're going to get there. So I want to quickly share with you now some thinking that I picked up from a guy called David Marquet, who's an ex-submarine commander in the US Navy, has transformed the way the Navy operates now over the last 10 or 20 years. David Marquet talks about breaking work down into red and blue work. And what that means is we structure work in terms of doing and thinking. So red work is the doing bit, it's the execution, it's the completion, it's the performing, delivery of tasks, it's the doing, it's the thing that we do every day, it's the activity. Blue work is the thinking, reflecting, planning, collaborating, changing, improving, having that different kind of mindset. But what's quite pervasive across most industries is this idea that it's an industrial age thinking where we have bosses and workers. And often the red work is assigned to the workers, the frontline staff, and the blue work is assigned to the bosses, the leaders, the higher ups. And we don't consider that there's an opportunity to bring that into all our roles. We're not in an industrial age anymore. We're not focused on pure manual labour, about outputs from individuals. We want people to think. We want our teams to think. And if we want our teams to think and contribute, we need to give them the opportunity to do that. And that's where we bring in blue work into our improvement journey. So there's a couple of characters I want to introduce into this, and I'm sure we're very familiar with people like this. We've probably been a little bit like this ourselves in the past. So we've got Fred and Sue. Fred's stuck in red. He's one of those people that we're all familiar with. Fred, driven to get stuff done, busy, double busy all the time, really active. He's a doer, gets stuff done. He's a bit of a hero firefighter. Finds it hard to stop and reflect a bit, probably finds that a little bit interrupting, probably finds that a little bit warm and fuzzy. So Fred likes to do stuff. He's an active person. Whereas Sue's stuck in blue. Sue really struggles to break free from that thinking time and launch into active red work. Very comfortable with reflecting, discussing, planning, writing action plans. Getting to the point where it's got to be perfect before we even start. So I think we see this a lot across these different characters, these different personality types within different improvement work. And I think sometimes we can all slip into this in various elements of it. I've been in both these at various points. I'll come back to Sue in a bit. I think Sue's story is an interesting one. I want to uncover a little bit about why Sue feels like she's in that mindset. So we should be all very familiar with plan, do, study, act cycles, part of the model for improvement. So I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail in this now, but I just want to this started to reflect in me about how we're linking this red and blue work into a very ubiquitous plan, do, study, act cycle. It's everywhere. I'm not always quite sure that it gets applied in its truest sense, but we're very familiar with seeing the term PSA cycles or PDSAs across the health service. What I reflected on though is that we're really good at the planning bit. Really good at writing action plans, good at writing papers to the board, business cases. We're really good at the plans. We sometimes even move on to some doing. Some of those plans actually materialise into some doing work. So what we've got here is blue and red work. So blue planning work and then into some red work, which is the doing. We're not great at the study bit. This is the bit where we come back and re-engage in some active blue work, where we learn from the red work that we've just taken place. So it's that study we're not great at. So as you start your improvement journey, how do you truly build in and use PSA cycles? As we don't study, we don't launch back into red work, which is the act part of it. So although very familiar, very consistently shared, and you see it out on Twitter and in various improvement methodologies across the country, not necessarily always applied in the way it should be. So it got me thinking about an analogy that I heard about. I think I read it in a book somewhere, and I started thinking about open water swimmers and applying the principles of red and blue work and PSA cycles to open water swimmers. So these guys here, they've done the planning, they've arrived on time, they've got to the right place, they've got the right kit, and they're about to launch into active red work. So that's the bit where they jump into the water. So their aim is really clear on this one. They know their destination. They're beginning with the end in mind, and that is to get to this point here. This buoy at the end of the middle of the lake, to get to there and turn around and come back again. If they only launched into red work, if they just launched into red work, head down, aim for that point there, didn't stop to think a bit, they'd probably end up over here somewhere. A bit like this guy here, to be honest. But what they will do is they'll engage in red work, they'll do the doing, but at various points, necessary points in time, they'll lift their head up, breathe, make sure they're right on track, which will ensure they stay on track and end up back at the right destination. So what they'll do here, though, it's a careful mix between enough red and enough blue work to ensure that they get there in the quickest possible time. Too much red work, head down, they'll lose direction. But too much blue work, too much lifting the head up, too much looking around to make sure they can see where they're going, they'll be slow and they'll lose the race. So in your improvement work, think about how you incorporate this stop breathing time where you just check on your direction. A lot of improvement methodology does tend to focus on reducing variation. And reducing variation is a good thing in many ways. But I want to talk to you very briefly about how we create convergence and divergence in our improvement work as well, as part of the red and blue thinking as well. So improvement approaches such as Six Sigma and others will focus very much on reducing variability. Anybody who's familiar with SPC charts will know about how we can not just look at step changes, but also look at reducing variation on that graph as well. And that is where we should be aiming for. But as part of our experiments and part of our tests of change, we should be thinking about how we can increase variation in our work as well. And we do that by creating diversity of thought. And we touched on this last month as part of the session. We talked about how you can build diversity into your improvement efforts so it doesn't become singularly minded, and we have different thoughts into the mix. And what we're building here is periods of divergence where we create thinking time, and that convergence where we focus very specifically on some active red work, which is around the doing and applying and the testing and committing to the word that we've agreed to. So people often ask me with this structure is, how long are we talking about here? What's the timescales that we're talking about? Is this over, is this blue work a monthly? Is this monthly meetings? Well, it can be, yeah. These can be program board meetings. These can be guiding team meetings, work stream meetings on a monthly basis. There could be weekly huddles where you come back together after a period of red work and then have a huddle quickly to engage in some blue work. If you're running something like a rapid improvement event, which I do quite frequently, the rapid improvement events that I run will be interspersed over periods of hours rather than weeks or months. So the blue work will happen for maybe a quarter of an hour in the morning, 10 minutes in the morning. We'll launch into a couple of hours of red work, come back at lunchtime for some blue work, and then review where we're at, reflect, and then move forward into the afternoon. And we see this again regularly in environments like ED and on board. So ED, there'll be safety huddles, huddle in the morning. What's the plan for the day? What's going on? Launch into some active work. Come back at lunchtime. Are we on track? What's the situation? Is it safe? Before we move on to the afternoon, and again through board rounds and afternoon huddles. So we're seeing this in place already, but we don't always see it in improvement efforts. So it's important that we build in this to our to our plans and our activity, that we know we've always factored in a period of blue where we can reflect and review with that improvement mindset before we move on to the next stage. So I said I wanted to come back to Sue, and I think it's really important that we sort of want to dig into this a little bit and about understanding why Sue is in that situation she's in. And I see this regularly across the country where you've got this essentially stuck in this period of planning and checking data and conversations, several meetings, but not actually launching into active red work. And I concluded from seeing a lot of people do this, and I think what it comes down to is a lot of it is based on fear. It's a fear of failure, it's a fear of getting it wrong, fear of being criticised, wanting it to be perfect before we even start. But the reality is that perfection never actually arrives, and that starting point never arrives. We just end up in a situation where we just have more meetings. We end up with a situation where we have paralysis by analysis. We just need more data. We just need another audit. We want to follow that up again. Let's just review it a bit more and see where it goes. We end up tying ourselves down with all this over analysis. And each piece of rope and each person there and each piece of string is just something else that's tying down this really great idea. And that for me comes from a place of is there a fear in the culture that we're working in, a fear of failure? The gap between the knowing and the doing is often quite significant. Many of you here and your colleagues will know what needs to be done. That we'll understand the need for change, but can we make that successful shift into the doing? And what sits in between that, what blocks that often, is this fear of failure, fear of getting things wrong, not being able to feel like you can test and experiment, not working in an environment of psychological safety, or whether there's a circle of safety around you that enables you to do that. I was recently involved in a webinar with South Warwickshire. It was last week or the week before, I think it was, and it was fascinating to hear their story where they ran a couple of perfect weeks, and what I got a real sense from them that every member of staff who was involved in that just felt like they could make a change. If they could make an improvement, they didn't ask for permission. They were okay to test. It was okay to experiment. They didn't have a fear of failure. There was a clear levels of psychological safety in that organisation that they knew that they could try things out. When I worked with Virginia Mason Medical Centre in Seattle, I walked through that organisation and I knew that every member of staff there felt they could make a change or make a tested improvement if they felt it was the right thing to do for their patients. There was clear psychological safety there where they knew that they could fail and they knew that they could experiment. And when I sort of reflect on that, I think where does that, as Churchill says here, it's the success is stumbling from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm. It's having that ability to feel like I can try this out and it doesn't matter if it fails. Now I recognise very much that it's easy for me to stand here and say it's okay to fail. Go and try some things out and try and see if they fail. Very easy for me to talk about this now. A lot more difficult in real life. I've been there. I've run improvement events. It is very hard. You want things to succeed. But when you can take a breath for a minute and then start to think about things in terms of let's experiment, let's try things out, you're not putting yourself under unnecessary pressure that everything has to succeed. You're accepting that some things might fail, but as long as we learn from them, that's the most important thing. And as Henry Ford said, failure is simply the opportunity to begin again, this time more intelligently. You pick up from what happened before, what worked, what didn't work, and apply that to your future improvement efforts. So again, it's constantly, iteratively, agilely, is that a word? Agile, your approach to actually changing your improvement efforts. Ultimately, what it does come down to, though, is levels of bravery in this, where if you want to jump from where we are to where you want to be, there is a leap of faith that you have to take. There is a levels of, we know this is the right thing to do, we do need to make that leap, and we're going to be open-minded that some things will work and some things won't. At the end of the day, you have to feel the fear and do it anyway. And now for something a little bit different. How do you eat your trifle? So some people, you may eat your trifle by eating the cherry first, and then the cream, then the fruit, then the custard and fruit, and then the Swiss roll down to the custard again. Very methodical. Me, I like to take a thin slice of all the contents of the trifle to get all the goodness of all the ingredients all together. But just a thin slice, because I can't eat all the trifle all in one go. If you only eat the cherries first, you might think, oh yeah, these cherries are nice, I enjoy cherries, these are nice, I like that, I'll move on to the next bit, I'll just eat the cream next. And halfway through the cream thinking, oh, this is a little bit sickly, I don't quite like this. And you might put the trifle to one side. And you might not then experience all the goodness and all the loveliness of the fruit and the custard and the Swiss roll further on. You've abandoned it because your initial ideas or initial feedback on the trifle wasn't great. So I encourage you to think about when you look to try some ideas out or test your ideas out. Chunk it small but do it all. Quote from David Marquet again, mentioned it before. Chunk it small but do it all. So this is a way that you take many ideas but make them small enough to make them manageable. So rather than focus on one big thing and try and implement that across wide areas, take many things and break them up and try and test them in smaller areas. A really great example of this, some of you may or may not be aware of something called the Safer Patient Flow Bundle. So I was involved in some of the early days of the Safer Patient Flow Bundle. And that was designed as a series of interventions, 5, the S, the A, the F, the E, and the R. And if you apply them all together, you get the results you're looking for. The less you apply them all together, you get diminishing returns. So what we find often is across organisations, you're trying to implement one of the letters. So maybe let's just go with just implement E or just implement the F across everywhere. But you're not going to get the returns you need. So the suggestion here is that chunk it down to really small, manageable parts, one ward, one day. Try all 5 measures together and see what results you get. So rather than try and do one big thing that ends up getting tied down with various over-analysis or meetings or overthinking, you end up with lots of small, busy, energetic ideas that take your improvement project forward. I often get asked in this, or these conversations often come up in conversation around how do we choose the right thing? So there's decision matrices and there's lots of fancy workshop tools that you can use to move these ideas forward. For me, sometimes it just feels right. It just feels, the idea that you've got just feels right. Similarly, it just feels wrong. It may just feel wrong, but often that improvement idea that somebody has suggested or has been floated around, it may just feel right. There's something in your gut that's telling you it's the right thing to do. And maybe this is because of my personality type, I don't know, but I really focus on this, and I think this is really important. This gut feel, I think, is quite powerful. I think it's influenced a lot by some of the reading I've done around that Malcolm Gladwell's written. And recently I read this quote from that. So Malcolm Gladwell says that our unconscious is really good at quick decision making. It often delivers a better answer than more deliberate, exhausted ways of thinking. So again, it comes back to our gut decisions again, our immediate instincts on what should be done next. So I started digging into this a bit more deeper. And actually, this isn't just whimsical, or, that's all a bit light and fluffy. This is actually built into our biology. This is actually part of who we are. Those gut feels are part of our survival, and it's what as a species has kept us on this earth for many, many thousands of years. It's the thing that kicks in the fight or flight mechanism. So it's a natural inbuilt reaction to what feels right and what feels is the right thing to do at any given time. And this sits squarely within our limbic brain, our reptilian brain. And our limbic brain is solely focused on emotion and feeling. And our older reptilian brain is about our instinct. These 2 parts of our brain are so much quicker than our more modern neocortex, which is more focused on rationality and thinking. The interesting thing about the limbic brain is it has no capacity for language. So when we're thinking about that gut feel, we can't describe it. We can't describe to anybody why we think that's a good idea. Because that part of the brain that's generating those thoughts has absolutely no capacity for language. That sits squarely in the neocortex, and that comes a little bit later on. Similarly, it's the same kind of thing that if you have a favourite car or brand or a handbag, you can't describe what it is about it. It's just something about it. So it's the same kind of principle that I'm going to encourage you to think about with your improvement ideas. If you think it's the right thing to do, maybe give it a go, because it probably is the right thing to do. Similarly, if it doesn't feel the right thing to do, then you may question whether you give it airtime. But just go back to the fact that actually this is about biology rather than any kind of management techniques or improvement methodology. This actually goes back to our core instincts. So as I bring this session to a close now, and we think about reflecting on what we've talked about there, how we adapt and how we learn as we go, as we move through our improvement journey, rather than just focusing on the outcome. Think about how we can be responsive and reflective and agile in our approach. And as I sort of thought about this, I was thinking about a guy who used to live up the road from me here in Shropshire. Some of you may know. And he says, it's not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is most adaptable to change. So thank you very much for your time on this session today. I hope it's been useful. We will share the recording of this and the slides after the event. A few takeaways for you today. What I want you to think about is how we build in blue work to your improvement journey. Think about that time, how we make it available to the masses rather than just certain individuals. Listen to your unconscious mind. It's probably pointing you in the right direction. Fail forward fast. So try things out, learn quickly, move on from the learning, and begin with the end in mind, then focus on the journey about how you're going to get there. I said last month I would share with you a number of books each month just for reference. So the reference points from this session, two great authors, I mentioned them already. Massive fanboy of both these guys, Malcolm Gladwell and David Marquet. Blink, Power of Thinking Without Thinking, brilliant book, all about our unconscious mind. And Leadership is Language, can't recommend this one highly enough. Another great book by David Marquet, also wrote Turn the Ship Around, which I'll probably read that one first and then move on to Leadership is Language. But Leadership is Language talks about the red and the blue work, so great reference points there. Next month, I'm taking a step down, and Spencer's coming in to deliver a session on uncovering the root cause. So look forward to, I'll be in the audience on that one. So looking forward to listening to Spencer. That one's on the 22nd of June, same time at 12:30. So that's all for me today. As I mentioned, my contact details are there. Connect with me on Twitter at Wallsboy. ESYST Twitter account is ESYST Network. All feedback is always greatly appreciated. Please let me know how you found the session or anything you want me to cover. My email address is on the screen there. But for now, I look forward to joining you all next month when we hear from Spencer, and I'll be joining you back here in July. Thank you very much.